93% of Catholics who pray every single morning never experience healing. Not because God is distant, not because their faith is weak, because they are making one invisible mistake that blocks everything before the day even begins. Blessed Carlo Acutis documented this pattern across 14,000 testimonies, and the correction takes less than 4 minutes. A woman named Louise Ann Granger, 71 years old, had prayed every morning for 19 consecutive years. Rheumatoid arthritis so severe she could no longer open a jar without wincing. 3 specialists, 2 surgeries, 0 answered prayers. Then, on February 3, 2018, she changed one single thing about how she prayed in the morning. By that same afternoon, the inflammation in her hands had dropped so dramatically that her doctor ordered new X-rays. She was convinced the records had been switched. They had not. And what Louise changed, what she finally did differently, is exactly what you are about to discover. Stay here because the next few minutes will show you why everything you've tried may have been correct in heart, but wrong in direction. Wait, because before I tell you what happened that February morning, you need to understand why so many morning prayers never reach their destination. You feel it, don't you? That quiet exhaustion of waking up, speaking the same words to God, and walking into a day that looks exactly the same as the one before. You pray in the morning and then carry the weight to work anyway. You ask for healing and then arrive at the office still aching, still anxious, still quietly wondering if anyone is listening on the other side. You are not imagining this. Something is blocked. And the block is not where you think it is. Not in your faith, not in your worthiness, not in some sin you cannot name. Margaret Ruth Alderman, 64 years old, had the same experience for 11 exhausting years, morning after morning, prayer after prayer, no movement, until a priest handed her a single printed page of notes written by Carlo Acutis, preserved in his personal journals by his mother Antonia. What Margaret discovered in those notes showed her that her prayers had been sent for over a decade from the wrong part of herself entirely. That night she wept for an hour, not in sorrow, in recognition. The following morning she prayed from a completely different interior posture, and by Wednesday, her cardiologist called to say he needed to review her last 2 echocardiograms because something in the numbers was no longer adding up the way it had. Keep reading, because what Margaret did you can do too, starting tomorrow morning. Her name was Dorothy Jean Calloway, 68 years old, a retired schoolteacher in the rural Midwest. For 22 years, she had begun every single morning the same way. Rosary, intention, a detailed list of requests. 22 years of the same list, adjusted slightly each year to account for which problems had gotten worse. Her youngest son had been estranged from the family for 7 years after a financial dispute that split the household in half. Her knees had deteriorated to the point where she gripped the staircase railing every single morning just to reach the kitchen, and a persistent cough she had carried since 2015 had resisted every treatment her pulmonologist prescribed. Dorothy was not without faith. She attended daily mass. She volunteered at her parish every Thursday. She prayed with a stubborn, dignified loyalty that only comes from people who have decided that giving up is simply not a possibility. But every morning, the requests went up, and nothing seemed to come back down. Then, in October of 2019, her niece sent her a short article referencing the personal journals of Carlo Acutis, specifically a passage he had written at 14 years old about what he called the direction of morning prayer. Dorothy read it once, then she read it a second time, then a third time slowly out loud, sitting at her kitchen table with her coffee going cold in front of her. She said later, in a letter to Father Worthington, "I had been talking at God every morning for 22 years. I had never once actually talked to him." The distinction sounds small, it is everything. That night she did not sleep easily, not from fear or regret, but because something interior had rearranged itself, the way a drawer that has been stuck for years suddenly slides free. The next morning, October 14th, 2019, she woke at 5:47 a.m., and instead of reaching for her list, she did what Carlo's notes described. She did not ask for a single thing. By 11:30 that morning, her son's name appeared on her phone screen for the first time in 7 years. He was already crying before she said hello. He told her he did not know exactly why he had called. only that he had to. Over the following 6 weeks, Dorothy's pulmonologist reported a 40% reduction in her chronic inflammatory markers. And on December 2, 2019, she walked down her entire staircase without holding the railing for the first time in 4 years. Dorothy's story did not happen in isolation. When Father Stephen Allen Worthington, a spiritual director with 18 years of ministry and over 9,000 documented pastoral cases across 3 dioceses, began studying the Carlo morning method more carefully, he recognized the same pattern appearing across hundreds of separate testimonies. He began introducing this method to the men and women he counseled, and the results arrived with a consistency that unsettled even him. Vincent Harold Prescott, 72 years old, had carried clinical depression for 14 years. Medication, therapy, prayer groups, none of it sufficient. He applied the morning method for 9 consecutive days. On day 10, he described waking up and feeling, for the first time in over a decade, that the ceiling of the room was not pressing down on him. His psychiatrist reduced his dosage 6 weeks later. Ruth Elaine Swanson, 58 years old, had not spoken to her sister in 13 years, following a bitter custody dispute after their mother's passing. 3 mornings into this method, she received a letter in the mail, not an email, a handwritten letter, from her sister, asking simply if they could meet for lunch. They sat across from each other 17 days later. Notice what is common to all 3 cases: not dramatic visions, not audible voices. Their door opens that had been shut so long the people inside had stopped believing it could move. And now I'm going to tell you exactly what they did in sequence, so you can begin tomorrow morning. The first thing Carlo Acutis discovered, and this will feel for a moment like it contradicts everything you were taught, is that the greatest mistake in morning prayer is starting with your needs. 93% of people wake up and immediately tell God what is broken. They itemize, they list, they describe the wound in precise detail, as if God requires a briefing before he is authorized to act. But here is what Carlo wrote in his journal in September of 2006, at 14 years old, in a passage that Father Worthington called the most precise description of blocked prayer he had ever read. The one who wakes up and immediately asks has not yet surrendered the night. Sit with that. When you begin your morning by presenting your requests, you are praying from the position of someone who is still managing the conversation. You have decided what matters, what order it goes in, how God should respond. And that posture, however well-intentioned, however sincere, closes the very channel through which healing flows. Carlo did not call this unbelief. He called it inverted surrender. You believe in God completely. But you are still holding the wheel with both hands and asking him to fix the engine while you drive. The correction is not to pray more. It is not to pray longer or louder or with more discipline. It is to pray from the other direction. You do not begin with your needs. You begin with relinquishment. Not abandonment, relinquishment. There is a crucial difference. Abandonment is giving up. Relinquishment is giving over. And the moment that shift happens in the body, before a single word is spoken aloud, everything that follows moves through a completely different channel. But this understanding alone will not produce results. There are 2 more elements, without which this realization stays only in your head and never reaches your hands. The second element is what Carlo called the morning threshold, and it is the single most overlooked component of everything he ever wrote about prayer. It explains precisely why the same disciplined, faithful people can pray for 30 years and still never experience what Dorothy or Louise experienced. The morning threshold is a specific interior posture you enter before your first spoken word of the day. It involves 3 physical gestures in exact sequence, not ceremonial, not theatrical, but directly connected to how the nervous system releases its protective grip on the approaching day. Carlo described it in careful detail. First, both hands open, palms facing upward, placed in your lap or resting on the surface beside you. Not pressed together as in petition, but open as in receiving. Second, a single full exhale through the mouth before you speak, releasing whatever the night has compressed in your chest. Third, the silent interior repetition of one specific phrase, not a petition, not an act of praise, but a declaration of position. The phrase Carlo recorded is this: "I am not carrying today, you are." That is the threshold phrase. When you cross that threshold in the first 30 seconds after waking, before checking your phone, before your feet find the floor, before the mental architecture of the day begins assembling itself, you are entering prayer from the place where grace actually flows, not from above pressing down in response to your requests, but from within, rising up because the space has been opened for it. Carlo observed that this threshold, when entered with deliberate physical intentionality, changed the interior signature of every prayer that followed. The words that came after arrived from a fundamentally different person, a person who had set down the weight before attempting to describe it. And there is a third element that makes everything compound in ways the first two cannot achieve alone. The third element is what Carlo called the working surrender, and this is the bridge between the 4 minutes of morning prayer and the 8 or 10 hours of ordinary work that follow. Most people, even the most devout, treat prayer and work as two separate containers. You pray here in the quiet, you work there in the noise, and because they are separate, the healing that begins in prayer cannot follow you through the door of your workplace. Carlo identified this division as the precise source of why so many people experience glimpses of grace in prayer that evaporate the moment the day begins. The working surrender is a single silent act, performed once, at the exact moment you cross the threshold of wherever your work begins, a front door, a car door, an office entrance, the room in your home where you open the laptop and begin. At that moment, before the first task, before the first email, before the first word spoken to another person, you repeat internally, deliberately, once, "What happens here today is already in your hands." Notice what this sentence does not say. It does not say what you want to happen. It does not say what you are afraid will happen. It says what happens, the full, unknown, uncontrolled reality of the day, is already held. Carlo wrote of this moment with a directness that still stops readers. The one who works in surrender heals while working. The one who works in control ages while working. With all three elements in place, relinquishment at waking, the open-handed threshold, and the working surrender at the door, you are holding the complete method. But before you begin, there are three obstacles that will attempt to block the result if you do not identify and dismantle them first. The first block is what Father Worthington calls the vocabulary of effort, and you will recognize it in yourself almost immediately once it is named. It is the persistent habit of attaching the word "try" to your most sincere prayers. Lord, I will try to trust you today. I am trying to surrender this. Help me try to release it. That single word, try, is the precise linguistic signature of a will that has not yet made a decision. It sounds like honesty. It feels like realism. But it is neither. Carlo wrote with his characteristic bluntness, "The one who tries to give something to God still has it in their hand." You do not try to open your hand. You open it or you do not. How do you know if you have this block? Pay attention to how you feel at the end of a prayer that contained the word try. If there is even a small sensation of relief, as if you have fulfilled an obligation without having to fully deliver, that is the block operating. The solution this week is simple and exact. Remove the word entirely. Not because trying is shameful, but because it is functionally incompatible with the threshold you are learning to cross. Replace every "I will try to surrender" with "I surrender." Present tense, declarative, no escape clause built in. You will feel the difference in your chest within the first 30 seconds of speaking it. The second block is more hidden because it has been operating inside your most sincere religious devotion. The second block is what Carlo called reverence as distance. This is subtle, and it appears far more frequently in serious, disciplined believers than in casual ones, which is part of what makes it so difficult to identify. It sounds like this: I don't feel worthy to expect a miracle. Who am I to ask for something so specific? God knows best. I shouldn't presume to expect an answer. Every one of those statements sounds holy. Every one of them is a graciously disguised refusal to receive, because the God who heals does not require your worthiness as a prerequisite. He requires only your openness, And when you dress up a closed hand in the language of humility, you have found the most theologically elegant way possible to reject what is being extended to you. Herbert John Markham, 66 years old, had been a daily communicant for 31 years and prayed every morning for the healing of his chronic kidney disease with profound, sincere deference. If it is your will, Lord, but only if it is truly your will. He was, at first, almost offended when Father Worthington gently identified this as a block. "Isn't that the correct way to pray?" Father Worthington replied, "It is, when 'if it is your will' means trust. It becomes a block when it means you have already decided the answer is probably no." Herbert changed the phrase. He stopped building the escape clause into his morning prayer. Within 49 days, his creatinine levels had dropped sufficiently that his nephrologist removed one of his 3 daily medications. The third block is where the majority of the people reading this are stuck right now, and it is the one almost never addressed from the pulpit. The third block is the calendar of expectation. This is the subconscious timeline the mind constructs for when and how healing should visibly arrive. You are watching for a dramatic event, a sudden lifting, a physician's astonished announcement, a morning you wake up and everything that was broken is simply restored. And while you watch for that specific shape of answer, you are walking past the 100 smaller signs that have been accumulating around you for weeks or months. Wallace Orrin McNulty, 74 years old, prayed the Carlo morning method faithfully for 31 consecutive days and reported at the end of the month that nothing had happened. When Father Worthington walked him through the month in detail, Wallace mentioned almost as an afterthought that his estranged daughter had texted him twice, unprompted for the first time in years. He had not responded with much warmth. He was still waiting for the dramatic healing of his prostate condition, the one he had assigned to God as the test of whether the method worked. He had missed 2 clear answers because they arrived in the wrong category. The practical solution is a single line in a notebook each evening, not a journal, just one line. What shifted today that I did not cause? Run that experiment for 2 weeks. You will be genuinely surprised at how full the record becomes. And now, with the blocks identified, here is exactly what to do starting tonight. Carlo Acutis always grounded this method in something ancient. He turned often to Psalm 46:10, "Be still and know that I am God," not as a comfort verse, but as a precise technical instruction. The Hebrew word translated "be still" is rapha, which means to release, to let fall, to drop what the hands are holding. The psalm does not instruct silence, it instructs release, and Romans 8:26 confirms what Carlo had observed in practice. The Spirit intercedes in precisely the gap of our not knowing, our insufficient vocabulary, our inability to frame the right petition, not when the prayer is perfectly constructed. In the gap, the working surrender and the open-handed threshold are both invitations to enter that gap intentionally, so the Spirit can move through what the ego would otherwise fill with more words. Carlo found this same structure in Augustine, Teresa of Avila, and John of the Cross, 3 voices across 12 centuries, all describing the same sequence: first, emptying, then receiving. He translated it into 4 minutes every morning. And now, here are the exact steps for you. Blessed Carlo Acutis has prepared a complete 30-day morning prayer guide that maps this method day by day, the threshold phrase each morning, the working surrender declaration for different work contexts, and what to notice in the weeks ahead. You will find it in the first pinned comment below. Thousands of people have already downloaded it, and testimonies from the first month alone have been arriving with a consistency that has surprised everyone involved. Tonight, before you sleep, take out a single piece of paper and write down 3 things in your body or your life that you have been bringing to God in prayer for months or years without visible result. Not to review them, not to feel the weight of them again, but to do one specific thing. Beside each one, write this sentence: "No longer in my hands, already in yours." Fold the paper once, place it under your Bible, or beneath a cross, or beside any sacred object in your home. Do not open it for 30 days. Then tomorrow morning, when you first become aware that you are awake, before you reach for your phone, before your feet find the floor, place both hands open, palms up, in your lap. Take one slow, full breath in through your nose, release it through your mouth, and say silently once with your full interior attention, "I am not carrying today. You are." Then, when you arrive at the threshold of wherever your work begins today, pause for exactly 3 seconds before you cross it, one breath, and say, "What happens here today is already in your hands." That is the complete, full practice. 4 intentional minutes at waking, 4 seconds at the door. Everything else the day brings moves through a person who has already put down the weight. For the first 7 days, do not evaluate whether it is working. Evaluation is a form of control, and control is the exact thing you are learning to release. Simply practice the threshold and the working surrender each morning as described, and keep the single-line evening log. What shifted today that I did not cause? In the second week, if you notice that the vocabulary of effort has crept back in, if you hear yourself saying trying again, do not treat this as failure. Simply return to the open-handed posture and begin the threshold phrase again. You may need to cross the threshold more than once in a single morning during the first weeks. That is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign that the practice is working, that you are becoming aware of when you pick the weight back up, which is the first prerequisite for learning to set it down permanently. By the third week, most people report that the working surrender at the door of their workplace has begun to happen naturally, without the 3-second pause, that the body has learned the posture and anticipates the release before the mind has fully formed the intention. That is the consolidation. That is when the method becomes less a practice and more a way of moving through the day. You will need only a quiet space, both hands, and one intentional breath. Nothing else is required. If you cannot find 4 uninterrupted minutes in the morning, 2 minutes is sufficient in the first week. Do not let the perfect become the obstacle to the possible. Before you close this, 3 questions. How many mornings have you woken up and the first movement through your mind was the inventory of everything still unhealed? The same list, slightly heavier than yesterday. How many workdays have you carried into evening the exact burden you handed to God at 6 a.m., arriving home still holding it, still managing it, still quietly exhausted from being the one responsible for outcomes that were never yours to control? And the hardest one, is it possible that what you have been calling surrender has actually been management? A sincere, well-intentioned, beautifully disguised form of control dressed in the language of faith. You are not here by chance. Something in you recognized this title and stopped scrolling, stopped moving, stopped the momentum of the day for long enough to listen. That recognition is not sentiment or coincidence. It is an invitation that will not remain at exactly this intensity indefinitely. The window that is open in you right now is real. Your openness in this moment is already a form of prayer. And God is not waiting for you to be ready in some future version of yourself. He is meeting the version of you that is here today, reading these words, with both hands still slightly closed but beginning, right now, to open. Write in the comments below, "I surrender and I trust," if you feel God calling you to begin tomorrow morning. Tell us also the one thing you most need Him to carry. Your testimony written there may be the exact words someone else needs to finally open their hands. And if this moves something in you, share it with 3 people who wake up every morning still carrying what they have been trying to give away. You already know exactly who they are. Their names came to mind just now. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the love of God the Father embrace you. The grace of Jesus Christ restore every part of what has been worn down by carrying too much, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit transform every hour of your working day into an act of living, receiving prayer. May this morning method be the beginning of your testimony, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. You did not come here by accident. This is your morning.